Welcome back to Live Now from Fox, and we want to discuss a major event that's happening on Monday as former President Donald Trump's hush money trial will begin with jury selection. Trump making history as the first former president to stand trial on criminal charges. Now, the case carries enormous political ramifications as potentially the only one of 4 criminal cases against Trump that could reach a verdict before voters decide in November whether to send him back to the White House. And this also comes as Trump continues to campaign. In fact, he's going to be holding a rally later on today in Pennsylvania, and we will carry that rally live here on Live Now from Fox. But again, Trump will also be inside this Manhattan courtroom for potentially weeks as this trial is underway. We do want to bring in Michigan trial attorney Jamie White joining us now to speak more about Trump's hush money trial. And Jamie, thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, question for you to explain to our Live Now from Fox viewers who are not exactly familiar with what this hush money trial is all about. Can you break it down for us?
I'll do my best. There's some complicated factors, but I think to summarize, it's important for people to understand. I think most people that have either followed me or reviewed me know my political affiliations. I don't want to go down that road, but for the purpose of educating your listeners, so Trump clearly, well, we'll see what the jury says, but clearly made an arrangement with Mr. Cohen to pay off commonly known as Stormy Daniels for the purpose of hushing her, be quiet about our affair. The morality and some of the insensitivities around that, I think are honestly not relevant. Unfortunately, this behavior goes on every day, all the time, between men and women. And I'm not suggesting it's legal because it's not. There certainly are some ramifications in the event that you lie about where those payments went to and why they went there. The big problem Mr. Trump has is, did he spend that money? Did he instruct Mr. Cohen to engage in those activities to hide from the electorate, hide from the American people what occurred? And that is the gravity of the allegation. And it appears to be supported, and corroboration is always important. One thing we're going to hear about over and over, and we're going to hear about it tonight at the rally, I suppose, is Michael Cohen is X, Y, and Z. And, I think that when we hear from, Ms. McDougal and other potential witnesses, they're gonna be able to decide that this is what was a pattern of behavior of the most significant nature. This was not a city council race. This was somebody running for president, and he succeeded at getting past this burden, at least initially. So I think a lot of people get caught up on the salacious nature of it, and I'm certainly not a fan of his behavior, but it's important to stay focused on what really happened here. We have, for the first time in the history of the United States, a United States presidential candidate who used funds, lied about the use of those funds for one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to, I suppose his family was a consideration and didn't appear to be a consideration before he went into the behavior. But I think we can argue it was at least a partial consideration. But ultimately, the real motivation here was, and we're going to hear this from Mr. Cohen and potentially others, is that he didn't want this to be in the electorate. And, we've come a long way from the Gary Hart days on a boat, with a woman who, certainly no arguments of payment or anything of that nature, to now political candidates are providing money and then lying about what that money was for one purpose only, and that is to deceive the public. And I think that's what Mr. Bragg is going to be focused on. The public's going to want to hear the salacious details, understandably so. But the real issue is, did you use money to cover up your immoral behavior, however you want to define it?
Right, and that is the case that Trump is charged with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records for that series of checks written to Michael Cohen to reimburse him for his role in that alleged payoff. Of course, Trump denying all wrongdoing. So Monday is jury selection. I have to imagine, especially with all of the spotlights on former President Trump, that a lot of people are aware of this trial. How difficult, from your legal perspective, will it be to seat an impartial jury?
So, they'll get there. I've tried hundreds of trials, and I can tell you that the vast majority of trials, especially criminal trials, involve nefarious characters. Whether it's the witnesses or sometimes even the people involved in the process. You're always going to have that issue. It just comes with the nature of the case. The challenge for really both parties, and this judge, I don't know him personally, but I think both parties, the defense and the prosecutor, really need people that are going to be able to focus on the legal rules. And I think sometimes we get caught up in court TV and we see things that, da da da. And, we see things that, CSI in 1 hour, they've figured out this piece of evidence or that piece of evidence. There really is no question about what occurred here. The only question is the legality of it. And again, going back to my first statements, is this the sort of behavior that happens a lot? It does. There's no question about it. But when you're doing it in the context of trying to hide from voters your behavior, you've created a significant legal problem for yourself. So I think they will get there. They certainly have enough applicants. I think last I heard there were 5,000 people available. I suspect there'll be dozens and dozens of alternates for various reasons. And what you're looking for is some people that, politics aside, can you accept the judge's instructions and can you follow the law? And that's what this is all based upon. And I'll just one final thought, if you don't mind. There's been there's a lot of hoopla about this being the history of democracy. Like, this is it. Like, if we don't get this right, if Trump gets elected and this, that, and on the other, this is the example. Guilty or not guilty, however this comes out, do people accept it, or do they allege some form of conspiracy on either side? And that is the test, and that is the challenge of finding the right jurors. And there's plenty of them out there.
And let's talk about the trial itself. How long do you anticipate the trial to last? You mentioned a number of star witnesses. I would imagine that there are going to be quite a number of witnesses called to testify. Are we looking at weeks, months? What is the typical timeline? Because again, as you said, there is so much scrutiny as this is a historic trial.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I wish I could answer definitively. What I would say is the facts here are straightforward. We have the documentation, we have the testimony of Mrs. Daniels, if that's what she prefers to be called. So the only real question are going to be legal questions. Now, Mr. Trump has already displayed an extraordinary, really effective way of delaying these things. This one has caught up to him, but I don't expect those delays to stop. We have what's called interlocutory appeals, which is a fancy word for something happened, time out, we want to go to the higher court in New York and have them decide this issue. And it would shock me if they have not already contemplated making those sorts of challenges to at least get through November. So, certainly weeks. And I think months is not out of the question, and I think that in the fairness of justice, and it's tough for me to speak of Mr. Trump objectively, but he has rights too, so if those rights create an opportunity that are not ethically prohibited by lawyers who are supposed to safeguard these decisions about what's relevant, what's not relevant, what do we argue about, what do we not argue about, he's entitled to those. I have a gentleman sitting, and he's been there 2.5 years in prison, and we're not getting close to a trial. So it happens, and the important part is for the judge to this point in time has been an incredible safeguard, in my opinion, at maintaining objectivity, despite the attacks on his daughter, which would be very difficult for me having a daughter of that age to, not have some commentary about that. But I do expect an objective jury to be selected eventually. There's always one or two, and what I mean by one or two, there's always one or two people that come in with preconceived notions. But if you can really do a good job of educating the jury of what their job is, this is not politics. It is politics, I suppose, but ultimately inside that courtroom, we're not going to have cameras. We're going to have people that are going to be given very, very strict instructions. And I expect the lawyers on both sides are going to try to find people relatively intelligent to help bring the group to what those instructions mean. And sometimes those instructions, politics aside, are not, they don't go your way. It's just the facts are the facts, and the law is the law. So I think we're going to see a fair trial. Manhattan is not, I don't want to put another city on the map, but Manhattan is not necessarily an unsophisticated group of jurors.
And no doubt, many eyes are going to be on this case, as it is historic. And again, jury selection starting on Monday. James, before we let you go, any last thoughts from a legal perspective on the proceedings, on the hurdles, on the process itself as it relates to this historic trial?
I would hope that despite our efforts and despite the gag orders, which have been repeatedly violated, I hope that members of both political communities or independents will allow this process to play out. I think it's an important example of why we are exemplary and other countries are not. I have my opinions about Mr. Trump, but I hope that if I was on that jury, his name would not be a party to those ultimate decision making. So it's going to be a challenge. This judge has his work cut out for him. The community has its work cut out for him. But if the rules are followed on all sides, we'll get a result, and hopefully people will live with it.
And you bring up a very good point, because there is due process and there is the legal system, which should be separate from politics. And as you mentioned, politics aside, this legal process must play out as it should. James White, who's a trial attorney in Michigan, as always, thank you for taking the time to speak with us on this historic trial that we will be watching on Monday.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Enjoy the weekend.
Absolutely. You as well.